Meghan just spent days in the country her husband calls home and somehow, across the entire duration of that visit, avoided every single camera in it. No doorstep photo, no wave from a car window, no blurry paparazzi shot from across a street, the kind that usually finds royals whether they want it to or not, the kind that has found nearly every other member of this family at some point during a UK visit regardless of how careful their security planning was.
This is the actual audio of the boos that the Harkles received.
For a woman whose entire public career, across every venture she has attempted since leaving the royal family, runs specifically on being seen. On angles, lighting, carefully chosen and controlled moments, produced content designed deliberately to shape exactly how she is perceived by an audience, that is not bad luck. That is a plan, executed with a level of discipline that is itself worth noticing. And once you actually line up everything surrounding this particular trip, piece by piece, I think you start to understand exactly what she might have been bracing for the entire time.
Everyone is asking the same question. What changed? Because for years we heard that the obstacle that was standing between Harry, Meghan, and these children was the UK thing around security.
Here is what is actually confirmed by multiple sources, before we get into any of the surrounding theory and speculation, because I think it genuinely matters to keep those two categories clearly separated throughout this entire discussion. Harry and Meghan reportedly brought Archie and Lilibet into the UK for this visit. Charles and Camilla met the family at Highgrove for what the palace described only as a private occasion. No photos released to any outlet, no statement beyond the barest confirmation that it happened at all. Reports say the children arrived separately from Meghan entirely, not as one unified family walking through the same door together at the same moment, which is itself an unusual and somewhat unexplained detail worth sitting with on its own before we even get to the theories.
Meghan Markle to return to the UK, that's an admission of professional defeat. That's an admission of we need help, in my opinion.
Harry had reportedly only seen his father in person a couple of times over the previous 2.5 years, which is a genuinely long gap for a father managing a serious health situation. So whatever else this trip turns out to be underneath all the surrounding theorizing and speculation, that specific reunion between a father and his son is a genuinely human moment worth acknowledging honestly on its own terms, entirely separate from everything else swirling around it. But Meghan being nowhere near a single lens for the entire duration of this multi-day visit is the part nobody covering this story has fully and satisfyingly explained yet, and I think it deserves to be sat with carefully and examined properly rather than rushed past quickly in favor of the warmer, more emotionally comfortable Highgrove reunion story. Here is a theory worth naming clearly and taking seriously because I think it is the most persuasive explanation currently on the table, more persuasive than simple scheduling or simple caution. Some royal watchers believe she is not avoiding cameras because she is shy or because there was genuinely nothing worth photographing. They think she is avoiding them because she is calculating, with real precision, exactly what happens the moment she is not off camera anymore, and has concluded that every available outcome works against her.
You talk about a woman bringing the ghetto into the royal family. This right here is on full display ghetto what is happening.
Walk through what she would actually be walking back into if she stepped into public view even briefly during this trip. This is a woman who has spent years publicly and repeatedly arguing that the UK is not safe for her family. Not a passing comment made once in an interview, but an actual sustained legal fight that went all the way to court over the level of protection she and Harry believe they are entitled to as private citizens who once held official roles. So consider carefully the genuine bind that creates for her specifically. If she steps into public view here and the reaction from onlookers turns out to be warm and welcoming, that quietly and immediately undercuts years of her own carefully constructed argument about needing extra protection in the first place. Because a warm crowd does not need armed security to manage it. And if the reaction turns out to be cold, loud, visibly hostile in any way, that becomes permanent footage that follows her into every single future headline about this family, replayed endlessly, clipped and reclipped for years.
We are as well, to see if they'll come on stage and show themselves, but I doubt it. I really don't think so. I mean, the trip has really been a train wreck, as Kinsey says, and I don't know if Meghan wants herself associated with this massive loss. I mean, how can we trust anything Harry ever says again, including what he says about his family, if he's been proven to have basically put falsehoods to the court?
There genuinely is not a version of showing up right now that resolves cleanly in her favor, no matter which direction the crowd's reaction goes. If that is the actual bind she is sitting in, and I think the evidence increasingly points toward exactly that. The smartest available move, the only move that avoids both bad outcomes simultaneously, is simple. Do not show up at all, and neither outcome ever gets the chance to actually happen. Some think that if she ever does step into public view over there, a hostile crowd reaction is precisely what she is bracing for, potentially on a scale approaching what Harry himself has been predicted to receive in some of the more pessimistic commentary. Not because any of this is confirmed in advance, because nothing like that can be confirmed before it happens, but because plenty of commentators have been predicting exactly this outcome for months now, publicly, well before this specific trip was even announced or planned, and she appears, by every available piece of behavioral evidence, to be acting like someone who has read those predictions carefully and taken them genuinely seriously rather than dismissing them. One brand and reputation management expert specifically put it plainly, weeks before this particular visit had even happened. A cool reception, maybe even audible boos from a crowd, is a real and live possibility if she turns up somewhere emotions are already running unusually high, as they clearly were this particular week. Nobody is saying definitively that it absolutely would have happened if she had appeared. People are saying with real conviction that it is exactly the reason she might not have wanted to stick around anywhere in public long enough to actually find out one way or the other.
We know Meghan was adamant that she was staying put in California, would never ever put a foot back onto English soil again unless someone was going to put a crown on her head. Maybe that's what she thinks is going to happen in the future. But things have changed. Right, we'll have to go back a little bit back in time with this, Mark, to explain it. But Meghan and Harry's American dream, their Californian dream, hasn't worked out, hasn't gone to plan.
Stay with me, because the timing surrounding this trip makes this whole theory land considerably harder than it would if it were sitting there in complete isolation, disconnected from everything else happening around the same window. This particular visit happened during the exact same week that Harry lost his privacy case against the publisher of the Daily Mail. A real court-confirmed loss, decided by a judge after a full hearing, with legal costs reported to be in the region of £50 million when you account for both sides of the litigation. Harry himself called the ruling a complete and obvious whitewash in those exact words to reporters directly outside the courthouse. His words, not mine, and worth repeating precisely because of how much anger they signal from someone who rarely speaks that bluntly in public. If Meghan had chosen to step into public view during that exact same week, she would have been walking into a crowd already primed and agitated by a very public, very recent defeat, with her own husband's quote about a rigged-feeling court still sitting fresh at the top of every single headline running that day. If the bracing for hostility theory holds any water at all, and I think it holds considerably more water than most casual coverage has acknowledged, this was possibly the single worst week in years to step out and find out the hard way whether the crowd's mood had shifted. So, unsurprisingly, and probably very deliberately, she did not.
Plan B is we've got to curry favour again with the king, because we may one day need to call on his services.
There is also a financial layer to all of this that almost nobody covering the story has connected directly to the fear angle, and I think it deserves its own honest flag, because parts of what follows are genuinely reported through credible sources, and parts of it are still floating around as unconfirmed speculation that has not been fully verified. Harry was in the UK around the exact same window, specifically for Invictus Games Foundation events, and there are reports circulating that the foundation has lost some significant major sponsor support across recent seasons, which would put real and mounting pressure on matching donation requirements tied to certain UK-based grants that the foundation relies on for a portion of its funding. If that financial pressure is genuine, and the sponsor attrition reports have come from multiple separate sources over recent months, then a high-profile, well-covered Sussex appearance is worth actual measurable money to that foundation in terms of donor visibility and renewed public interest. Which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question that I think deserves to be sat with honestly, rather than rushed past in favor of a simpler, more comfortable explanation. Is showing up, or very deliberately and strategically not showing up, ever purely personal for this particular family anymore, at this stage of their public life? Or is there always a second calculation quietly running underneath every single decision about which version of events generates more headlines and which specific headlines ultimately generate more donors and more revenue for whichever venture is currently in need of visibility?
What will Meghan make of this defeat in the High Court yesterday, which, by the way, is on top of January 2024, when Harry withdrew his legal action against the publishers of the Mail on Sunday in regard to their coverage of his request for armed royal protection. He changed his mind on that one, and he had to pay £750,000 worth of costs of the Mail, and probably the same amount for himself. So he's been here before.
I am not going to pretend I know the definitive answer to that particular question, because I genuinely do not, and I think claiming false certainty here in either direction would be a dishonest thing to do to you as a viewer. I do not think anyone genuinely outside their actual inner circle knows the real answer either, no matter how confidently certain commentators across this space present their own theories as though they were settled, established fact. If you want the next update on this the moment it actually drops, rather than finding out 3 days late through some clip with a misleading caption slapped onto it, that is genuinely what subscribing is for on this channel. Not a formality, not a throwaway line at the end of a video, an actual practical heads up the moment the real story moves, and this particular story is moving considerably faster than most.
I don't think she wants to be on the arm of a loser. And what does Meghan Markle do when Harry's going through difficult times publicly? She disappears. When you think about how Jimmy Kimmel was tearing into him over Spare, and he's trying to promote, where's Meghan when he's promoting Spare? She disappears. Where was Meghan when he lost his rabbit case, when he sat down and was reaming the royal family to the BBC? Meghan mysteriously disappears.
Some think Harry and Meghan are not even fully aligned on what this particular trip was supposed to be in the first place. And I think this specific theory deserves more attention than it has received in most coverage, because it would explain a lot of the inconsistency that has characterized this visit from the very beginning. The theory goes that Harry genuinely wants his children connected to their grandfather and to their broader family heritage, in a way that feels increasingly urgent given his father's ongoing health situation, while Meghan has far less interest in remaining tied to the institution at all at this particular point in her life and career. If that reading is accurate, it would explain the entire on again, off again, we're coming, we're not coming pattern that has now characterized every recent UK visit far more convincingly and far more coherently than simple scheduling conflicts or logistical hurdles ever could on their own. It would also explain quite directly why Harry spent the week fully visible in front of cameras, engaging with the public and the press at various events, while Meghan spent the exact same week in front of exactly none of them, appearing nowhere, commenting on nothing. Two people quietly running two entirely different versions of what was supposedly, on paper, the same shared family trip under the same public banner, but for what appear to be two genuinely different sets of underlying motivations and priorities. Here is a comparison worth actually making directly, because I think it is the one people keep skipping past in favor of the easier, considerably lazier comparison that gets reached for automatically. Everyone wants to measure Meghan against Diana every single time this family generates headlines. Whether the comparison genuinely fits the specific situation or not, whether it illuminates anything useful, or simply generates clicks through an emotionally loaded historical parallel. But a far more useful and far more directly relevant comparison this particular week is Meghan against her own husband, side by side, in the exact same 7-day window. Harry walked into a courtroom, in full public view, lost publicly and decisively, said something quotable and pointed on the way out to a bank of waiting cameras, and left the entire experience fully visible to the public, with his dignity somewhat bruised but ultimately intact and recognizable. If the fear theory about Meghan holds up under scrutiny, she walked into the exact same week, facing arguably similar or related public pressures, and made absolutely certain there was nothing left for a single camera to catch it all, anywhere, at any point during the entire visit. One of them took a visible public hit in front of the entire watching country and processed it openly. The other one made herself functionally impossible to hit in the first place, removing the possibility entirely rather than absorbing any potential impact. Whether you find that second approach admirably disciplined, strategically sound, or find it instead quietly telling about where things actually stand probably depends heavily on how much patience you personally have left for either of them at this particular stage of the story. There are also unverified claims currently circulating that some Invictus-related funds were previously used to cover personal expenses, wardrobe reportedly among them. I want to be completely straight with you about the status of this claim. It is an allegation, not a confirmed finding of any kind. Nobody has proven it through any independent audit or investigation that I am aware of, and if it eventually turns out to be entirely false, repeating it now as though it were settled fact would be genuinely unfair to everyone involved. But it is part of the noise currently surrounding this trip, circulating widely enough that it has become part of the broader conversation whether or not it holds up under scrutiny, and if there is any truth to it at all, even a partial truth. It adds another very concrete and practical reason for Meghan specifically to want zero cameras anywhere near her during this particular week. Because a single new photograph right now does not simply get read in isolation as Meghan visiting the UK for a family occasion. It gets read against every single unresolved question already sitting quietly in the background of this story, accumulated over years of similar controversies. Some think her absence is not primarily about fear of a hostile crowd at all, but about something more calculated and more forward-looking. Controlling the story itself, staying fully invisible right now specifically so that whatever footage does eventually surface does so entirely on her own terms, at a time and in a format of her own choosing, rather than getting scooped unexpectedly by a stray phone camera on some random Tuesday that nobody could have planned for. There are reports that Harry may visit Althorpe House, the Spencer family's ancestral estate, ahead of the 30th anniversary of Diana's passing, reportedly to gather footage connected to a documentary project currently in some stage of development. Charles Spencer, Diana's own brother and the current custodian of that historic estate, has already made a public statement to the press acknowledging genuine interest around a potential visit of this kind taking place. If a documentary really is part of what is driving this entire trip on some level, that reframes basically everything else in this story that we have already discussed. Suddenly, the low visibility, the separate arrivals into the country, the total and complete absence of Meghan from every single available frame, all of it could simply be footage waiting patiently for a release date and a negotiated market value, filmed during a stretch of days that is currently being sold to the public as personal, private, and entirely unplanned in nature. Those two explanations, genuine fear of hostility and calculated documentary control, can both be a little bit true at exactly the same time. And I think that overlap is precisely why this trip refuses to sit still inside any single, clean explanation, no matter how hard commentators try to force one. She could be avoiding a hostile crowd and simultaneously controlling a documentary release timeline and quietly disagreeing with her own husband about the entire underlying point of the visit. All three things operating simultaneously, all three contributing independently to the exact same visible result. Nothing. No photo released anywhere, no public appearance of any kind, no comment offered to any outlet. When one single theory explains an absence like this, that is simply a guess, reasonable, but unconfirmed. When three completely different and largely unrelated theories all independently predict the exact same blank space in the public record, that blank space starts looking considerably less like coincidence or accident, and considerably more like the single most efficient outcome available to her, regardless of which specific version of events ultimately turns out to be the accurate one when more information eventually emerges. If you have spotted something in this story that has not made it into a single panel show or any major outlet yet, drop it below in the comments, because more than once in this ongoing saga, the single sharpest catch across the entire story has come from someone in a comment section connecting two dates or two details before anyone with an actual press badge managed to notice the same pattern. So where does this actually leave things once you have sat with all three theories and none of them cancel each other out? Because at some point, the fear of the crowd theory specifically has to meet the calendar and be tested against future events rather than just this one visit. If that particular theory is right, expect her to keep skipping public appearances in the UK for as long as the underlying security argument still needs to hold up cleanly in ongoing court filings and legal proceedings, because one relaxed, warmly received public outing undoes years of careful legal positioning in about 4 seconds of unhelpful footage circulating online. Expect more of these visibly mismatched trips going forward. Him fully visible and fully present at events, her somewhere else entirely, absent from every frame, because two people who genuinely do not agree on the actual underlying point of a visit are going to keep producing visits that simply do not add up cleanly from the outside, no matter how many carefully worded joint statements eventually get issued to try to smooth over the inconsistency. What is actually confirmed at the end of all of this, stripped of every theory and every piece of speculation, is simple enough to say in a single breath. Harry came to the UK, lost an expensive and very public case in open court, said something pointed and quotable about it on the way out to reporters, and did every single part of that experience in full view of the entire watching country. Meghan came or did not come, depending entirely on which specific report you choose to believe on any given day, and left behind exactly nothing for anyone to point a lens at, anywhere, at any point. In a family whose entire currency, going back decades at this point through multiple generations, is fundamentally about what gets photographed and what conveniently does not, choosing to be the one person who leaves zero visual evidence behind for an entire multi-day trip is not nothing. It is not an accident, and it is not simple bad luck with timing. It might be genuine fear of what a hostile crowd would do to years of careful legal argument. It might be pure calculated strategy around controlling a documentary timeline and a market value. It might, and this is honestly the theory I would put actual money on if pressed to choose just one, be both of those things running at exactly the same time, reinforcing each other, with neither one fully explaining the whole picture on its own. What do you think? Is Meghan's total absence from every camera this week primarily about genuine fear of a hostile crowd, calculated documentary control, or something else entirely that none of us have even considered yet? Drop your own theory in the comments below, subscribe if you haven't already so you catch the next update the moment it actually happens, and I will see you in the next one.